Welcome to the second CSET webinar. Hopefully we are in a series where we will be doing these once a month, showcasing the research that is occurring through the University Transportation Center for Safety Equity in Transportation, focusing on rural, isolated, tribal, and indigenous communities and safety equity in those areas. Our second presentation is Exploring Rail Trails in Our Communities, presented by Michael Lowry and Kevin Chang of the University of Idaho. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube after the webinar is over. And on that note, I'm going to turn things over to Mike and Kevin. So please sit back and enjoy this webinar.
Great. Thank you, Vicki. And thanks for inviting Kevin and I to present today. Hello, everyone. This is a chance for us to share the results of a project that we've recently completed. So this was funded by CSET. It was an ongoing project over the last few years, and the final report is now available on the CSET website. So if you have more interest, you could look there, but you can also reach out to us for any questions you might have. So this project was looking at rail trails and the opportunities that they present. So, you know, for about 100 years, the United States was very heavy with railroads, from the Industrial Revolution up into about World War II. And then when cars took over, that meant thousands of miles of railroad that became abandoned. And so it's estimated that over 20,000 miles of railroad are out of service in the United States. And of that, about 3,600 miles are now used for bicycle and pedestrian travel. And that's all made possible through the concept of rail banking. So in 1983, the National Trail System Act made it possible that there could be an agreement with rail companies that they didn't lose full ownership. They just are, and that's the idea of banking. It's like putting it aside for a moment in case they ever needed to use it again. And that allows the right-of-way to be paved or to have the rails removed and perhaps just gravel in some way so that it can be used by the public for walking, biking, jogging, and any use. And often these railroad lines that have been abandoned or out of service are right in the middle of communities that are rural, isolated, and tribal. And so this is why CSET took this project on to fund it, to look at, are there opportunities here for using these trails more effectively for transportation. That image at the bottom is from a group called the Rails to Trails Conservancy. It's a nonprofit organization, and they just last year announced an effort that they are spearheading to connect a series of rail trails that would go from Washington to Washington, and that would cut right through Idaho and Washington, both of which are up here in the Pacific Northwest. And that's an exciting thing. You can follow the progress that they're making, but that's obviously not the only set of rail trails. There's, as I said, 3,000, over almost 4,000 miles of rail trails throughout the United States. So this project wanted to look closer at rail trails, and there were three specific things that we wanted to do. First, we wanted to develop a new method to estimate trail volume. So that's the usage of how many bicyclists and pedestrians are out on the trails. The second thing we wanted to do is look at locations where perhaps new trails could be established in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And then the third thing we wanted to do is survey trail users and non-users to assess barriers and opportunities. So the rest of this presentation is going to just click through these three topics. I'll do the first two, and then Kevin's going to talk about the surveys that we did. So the first, estimating trail volume. So this is, again, the usage, the number of bicyclists and pedestrians that are using this. But before I go into how that is done, let's take a reminder on how we do this with automobiles. So this is just a refresher on traffic monitoring, the practice of estimating usage. And there are two things that are needed. First is a set of permanent traffic recorders, and often these are inductive loops that are put into the pavement. They're permanent there, that's the name. And so they're counting the cars 24/7, 365 days out of the year, continuously counting. They're also called continuous counters. And then there are short duration counts, and these are one way to do it is with inductive tubes that are sorry, not inductive tubes, pneumatic tubes. So that's air pressured tubes that you put for a temporary, maybe 3 days, and you count cars that way. And so these are called short duration counts. They're also called coverage counts. And I'm showing the map of the state of Washington, and on the left is all of the PTR locations in Washington, and on the right, all of the short duration counts that Washington State DOT manages. And I thought it would be interesting to give you a moment to guess how many there are of each of these. So on the left, those red PTRs, how many dots do you think? And then on the right, how many of those short duration counts? It's like the game of guessing the jelly beans in a jar here. Oh, here's the answer. On the left, there's about 200. So WashDOT manages 200 PTRs, and they manage close to 4,000, 3,643 short count locations. And so then what you do with these is a process of combining the information gathered from both. The first step is to use the PTRs to create seasonal variation factors. And those factors can be plotted as shown here to show what they're doing is the factors are capturing the variation that goes on over any time period. This one image is showing the variation over the months of a year at a particular PTR in Washington State. And then once you have those factors, you then multiply those times the short duration count, because the short duration count, let's say, was done in September, and you'd like to know, well, how does that compare for the annual average daily traffic? And so you multiply that factor to get the AADT. So this is the standard practice for traffic monitoring. And that is the same for bicycles. And so with bicycles, we have permanent traffic recorders. Again, they're often inductive loops that are embedded into the concrete. And then there's the short duration counts. Short duration counts for bicycle and pedestrians is, there are some technology out there that can be used, such as infrared sensors and other ways to do it, but perhaps the most common is just to have a person go and count the number of bicyclists and pedestrians going through an intersection or going past a screen line point somewhere on a street. So again, I'm showing the locations in the state of Washington that are managed by WashDOT. There might be other locations that cities do on their own, but as far as the state, at a state level, the Washington State Department of Transportation manages these. Again, I'll give you a chance to see how good you are at guessing the number of dots there. So on the left, the PTRs for bicycles, there's 44. And this was at the time of when we started this project. I think they're actually up to about 55 now. And then on the right is the short duration location that WashDOT is involved with, and there's about 280 throughout the state. And again, this was from when we started this project a few years ago. I think they may have more now that they're managing. And then there's also local counts that occur as well that aren't part of the state system. And it's the same process. You take the seasonal variation factors that you get from the PTRs, and there's a process to take that continuous data and create the factors. And I'm showing that here on the right. The table on the right actually breaks it down by month and by day. So then when you do step 2 and you collect short duration counts, you can multiply what you observed for that short period times the factor to get an annual average daily traffic. And so that is the process for traffic monitoring of bicycles and pedestrians. So with that background, now let me tell you about what we wanted to do here. So to begin, this is it's a good start. And in fact, Washington having 44, that's it's better than a lot of states. Idaho at a state level does not manage any PTRs for bicycle and pedestrian. There are some local communities that have PTRs in Idaho, but there's nothing managed by the state. And I think Washington actually is unique in its effort in having that. But even still, 44, when we saw there was 200 for cars, we would certainly like to see more PTRs. And so that led us to but it's expensive. It's expensive to install these on trails. And so the idea that we had is, well, what if we had virtual counters rather than an installed inductive loop? Is there a way that we could virtually count? And so this led us to this idea of using Strava data. So you may have heard of Strava before. It's a fitness app, and there's many other fitness apps out there that are similar, and they're used by bicyclists, and they're used by joggers and walking, lots of different activities. You turn the app on your phone, and then you go do your activity, and it tracks your path. And you do it for your own personal reasons, that you want to see where you've went, or maybe you want to do it sort of a competition with your friends or family about who's walking more and where you're walking. And then that's uploaded to in this case, Strava's website. And then Strava has a record of that, of all users, of where they've been for their activity. As a user of Strava, you then have the choice to let that be public, or you can keep it private. Most Strava users actually let it be public because it's sort of interesting to be a part of the community and see where everybody's going. Well, Strava at the start of this project was selling their data, and so our thought was, could we buy the data for locations and use it like a permanent counter? And so that was our plan. We would buy Strava data. Now what we wanted to do was buy it at the PTR locations so that we could do a then comparison of the Strava, and then we develop the plan was to develop Strava based factors and then PTR based factors. And if the factors are similar, then our theory would be that we could use Strava to estimate AET without having to install a permanent counter. And the cost for the Strava data is not very expensive. In fact, we purchased Strava for 44 we actually purchased it for all locations. I mean, all 44 locations. And the cost to do that was about the cost to install one PTR. And so, a state or a city could, the idea is that they could go and do this at many locations. One city could do 44 locations just right in their city for the same cost as one PTR. So this was our idea, and it sounds exciting. Unfortunately, it didn't work out as well as we had hoped. It wasn't a complete, I want to say failure. It was a success for some locations, and some locations it didn't work out. And so I'm going to describe that. And it was for a variety of reasons. So let me go back. We actually purchased for all 44 locations, but there were some issues both with the PTR data and with the Strava data that limited us down to these locations. And I actually forget off the top of my head how many that, I think it's 28 that in the end we're able to analyze. And so these are the locations all in Washington where we did our study. So here's where now I explain one of the reasons why it didn't work out as planned. Strava had in their agreement with us that the data would be anonymous, so that we wouldn't know how many any private information of who the users were. And when we made the purchase, that seemed just fine with us because we didn't need to know. All we wanted to know was how many users there were passing a location. The data is shown here that we received in this Excel file. So it shows the location, which is indicated with an ID, and then the year of data. And we were looking at 2018. That's when the project started in 19. So we looked 1 year back to get this data. And it shows the day, and that is actually the day of the year. So that was numbered 1 to 365, and then the hour, and then the number of people who passed that location at that day and hour. And so we requested the count to be in bins of 1 hour. So again, I'll give you a moment to look at that data and see if you see any issues, if you're able to guess what our problem was. Well, the first thing you might wonder is, why is it showing 0 at some of these hours? Well, so here's the issues with the data. There was 2 main issues that didn't work out for us. One is that for privacy reasons, they coded everything that was lower than 5 as a 0. So when you see that 0, that means there was, and also, by the way, we bought the data for bicyclists and pedestrians. The pedestrian data was so small that, well, the bicyclist data had problems, and the pedestrian data had even worse problems. So we didn't even proceed with doing the analysis for pedestrians. We just focused on bicyclists. And the way Strava knows if you're a bicyclist or pedestrian, because you indicate when you're using the app, are you biking or walking or jogging? So it could actually be walkers or joggers. The PTRs know because the inductive loop, and then there's also an infrared sensor, and so it is able to distinguish whether there was metal associated with the bicyclist when they passed or not. And so that's how the PTRs know. So anyways, what I'm showing you here is for bicycle data. The first issue was this, that they coded 0 for anything less than 5. But then the other issue is that they rounded everything to multiples of 5. And we, after we received the data, we went back to Strava and tried to sort out why they were doing this. And it was not specified in this way in their agreement with us, but they said that they needed to do it for privacy reasons. It's not exactly clear to me how that helps in any way, but that's the way it was. And so we had to work with it, and it proves to be a problem because bicycle volumes are so small. So here this is now us looking at the data and trying to get a sense of what it is. You can see of all the data we received, there was 25,000 times that there was a 0 count. So that's the majority of what the volumes are at an hourly rate. They're quite small. But there is a difference between 4 and 1, but we don't know that difference in our reporting, and so getting the correlation is not going to be as nicely as we would have liked. And so you can see that most of the counts were less than 20 or even less than 10, and we don't know the exact number at the hourly rate. So that was unfortunate. Nevertheless, we proceeded, and you'll see that it did work in some cases. So I'm going to start off and show you one of the locations where it worked really well. This was at the Sammamish River, and on the left you're seeing the factors that we developed using the PTR data, and on the right you're seeing the factors that we developed from the Strava data, and they are actually very similar. So the monthly variation, you can see a similar pattern, and it does as expected, higher volumes in the summertime. And then the weekly variation also does as expected, higher on the weekends, and very similar factors. Let me show you at the hourly level. this is just, we did it for every season, but this is just showing the summer season. And so in the summer, the factors again followed a very similar pattern. The Strava, you see on the weekend that there's unimodal, which is typical for bicycling, that we expect around lunchtime a large volume of bicyclists, and then during the week a morning peak and an evening peak, and that's apparent on both the PTR based factors and even more so on the Strava based factors. So these factors for this location, Sammamish River, could be used. So this was a success. This was exciting to see that the Strava data could be used to develop factors and then applied to any short duration count to get an estimate of AEDT. Unfortunately, so there was 44 locations. We brought that down to 28 because of some other data issues. So roughly 30 locations, and of the 30 locations, only about 10 had a nice correlation between the PTR factors and the Strava-based factors. At the other 20 locations, we saw issues, and these are the types of issues we saw. Here is at the Ben Burr Trail, and on the left are the PTR-based factors, and on the right, the Strava-based factors. So the issue is that count of 0 was causing the factors to be 0. So you can see in January, February, March, and December that the factors could not be developed. And then during the week, on the right down there at the bottom right, that there were same issue. The factors could not, because there's no count there. It was being recorded as a 0. We did play with the idea of, well, what if we just put it at 2 so that we could at least get a number? And it didn't really make an improvement. Let's look at the week. If we look at the hourly factors. So on the left is the PTR based factors, and then on the right is factors developed from Strava, and they much more erratic. Again, going down to 0 quite often, because that was a common hourly count, would have been showing up as 0. Once again, we looked at saying, well, let's just assume that there was not 0. Every time we see 0, if we put it 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, what does that do? And it just was not able to fix the situation at these locations. So kind of mixed results here. We had 10 locations that it worked really well, and then 20 locations about where it did not work. So the project is done, but a phase 2 of the project as we move forward will be to investigate a little more about the good locations. And in the report, I describe some ideas we have for investigating that a little, teasing out what the difference is, and then if we know that, then we could say that this method does work, but it only works in certain situations. And so that's the goal of that first bullet point. And then the other bullet point there is, well, maybe we look at other data besides Strava. There are now other fitness apps, and then also Google is making their data available as well through purchasing. And then there's also some aggregators, companies that take data from various sources. So they take it from Strava, they take it from Google, they take it from MyFitnessPal or any other app that's out there. In one company that does this is called Streetlight, and so then they sort of do some synthesis of those data sources to provide some data. And so that'll be another thing we do in the future to try and further our development. One thing I didn't say at the beginning is actually this idea of using Strava data is not unique. Others have done that. What was unique was our use of the data by creating factors. Others have used Strava to try to directly estimate volumes, and again with mixed success, in part because the number of users of Strava is relatively small. At some locations it can be down to like 1% of all users. and then other locations up to 20% of users. So there's actually lots in the literature of people doing it that way. Our effort was the first of that we're aware of somebody using the data not to directly estimate the volumes, but rather to estimate factors, which would then be used to estimate the volumes. And so we'll continue to proceed down the lines to see if we can get that working. So now let me talk to you about the next thing in this project, which was to identify locations for potential new trails. Again, as I said, throughout the United States, there's over 20,000 miles of out-of-service rail lines. And so the first thing we did is we wanted to track that down and understand it a little better for our region. And there is a way to do that. It's OpenStreetMap has, which if you're familiar with OpenStreetMap, you know that it's a crowdsourced mapping web page where people can go in and add information to the map. And so we went to the OpenStreetMap and downloaded all of you do a query, a filter on railroads that, and there are these categories that they use: abandoned, disused, and razed, and that is just a different level of how unused it is, from the top there down to the bottom. The bottom is plants have overgrown it, trees, and it's just almost unrecognizable. Whereas abandoned means that it might have the tracks still, but it's not being used. And then disused, some of the tracks are missing, so it couldn't be in use. And so we wanted to find and map this for our region, and we found that there was a total of about 8,000 miles, 8,600 miles in the states of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. So then once we did that, the next step of this project was to say, now of these locations, is there a way we could say, is there a population near this location that could benefit from it? Certainly all of these locations, all of these right-of-ways could be converted to paths, and they could be used by people who do what's called destination use. This is where you get in your car and you drive out to a trail because you want to do a Saturday ride on it. But what we were more focused on was daily use, meaning trails that were in a populated area that could be used by the local community for commuting or for going to the grocery store. So to better understand this, we created a GIS analysis tool. So GIS is if you're not familiar with it, it's a mapping software to do spatial analysis of geographic information systems is what it stands for, and it's for looking at spatial data. And this tool we created, you're seeing actually here in the middle, the interface for the tool. It's written in Python code. So we wrote the tool, and you can think of it as an add-in to ArcGIS. It's for this particular GIS software called ArcGIS Pro. And this tool is available. If you are interested in it, you can contact me and I can share the tool with you. The tool has an input where you say what is the location that you want to look at, what is your buffer distance that you would like to analyze, and then it will output some more GIS data, as well as it will output an Excel file with the data that you're looking for, or that it produces. So what does it do? It connects to the U.S. Census Bureau, and it, with a buffer of whatever you define on the location, it downloads all the demographic data for that location. So here's an example of the output. You provide this location. Here's an abandoned railroad, and then here is the information that it output for income and then age group and then ethnicities. And so that's the tool, and the report describes this more in detail and also presents some analysis that was done for various locations. We actually did 9 locations that we highlighted as places where there could be a potential new rail trail developed. So these are places where a trail has been abandoned, and it goes right through and again, we wanted to focus on rural, isolated, and tribal communities, and the potential for new trails there. So those are highlighted in the report. So that was the completion of that. I am now going to turn the time over to Kevin to talk about the last part of our project, which was a survey.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. I'll have you be the slide controller. If you would advance to the next slide, please. So for this study, we took a look at a particular trail in northern Idaho called the Trail of the Coeur d'Alenes. And Mike, if you could, there we go, perfect. So a quick synopsis of this trail. It is a 10-foot wide trail, extends for over 70 miles, 73 miles to be exact. It's an asphalt paved trail. It follows the Union Pacific Railroad, the right-of-way of that Union Pacific Railroad. And it opened in the early 2000s, in 2004, and represented a significant environmental upgrade to the region. There was a lot of cleanup that was involved. The railroad bed needed to be covered and built over, as there had been quite a few contaminants in that area. And so you can see that it extends from Plummer at the western terminus, sort of meanders along Lake Coeur d'Alene, and then continues, as I mentioned before, over 70 miles to the east, following Interstate 90 all the way over to Mullen, which represents the eastern terminus. Mike, next slide, please. And here we have just kind of a quick photo tour of the trail itself. Again, starting from the upper left, we have the western terminus in Plummer. Plummer, in fact, is also located in the Coeur d'Alene Indian Reservation. So there is a component, there's a tribal component to this trail as well. In fact, the tribe has been, throughout the construction and development of the trail, was just a real asset, a wonderful partner with regard to the construction and development of that trail. The middle photo in the upper row represents one of the comfort stations near Lake Chacolet, a very scenic portion of the trail. It goes next to a lake, and there's a nice bridge in this area. The third photo in the upper row, the rightmost photo, as well as the left photo in the lower row, are both from Kellogg, Idaho. And then we have 2 additional photos. One you see in the lower the middle is a photo that was taken from Wallace, Idaho. And that large structure that is covering the trail is in fact Interstate 90. So you can think of it as a kind of a weather protected, weather buffered section of the trail. And then the final photo in the lower right corner represents the eastern terminus. This is the parking lot located in Mullen, Idaho. Mike, next slide, please. So we wanted to look at the utility of the trail. And for this study, we took a couple of different approaches. As I mentioned, as illustrated from the photos, we conducted site visits of the trail itself and encourage anyone in the CSET community, next time you're in northern Idaho, to certainly spend some time visiting the trail. It's a wonderful resource and asset. And then to focus on the actual usage of the trail, we ended up conducting 2 separate surveys. And what we wanted to do was gauge both the opinions of the trail users as well as their usage habits. And so we conducted this study, again, with two different surveys. The first was an Intercept survey, where we physically visited the trail and stopped people who were using the trail and asked them a series of questions. And I'll show you that survey here in just a minute. And then the second approach that we took was an online survey in which we mailed a postcard to residents who live along the trail. And on that postcard, there was a link in which they would have then accessed, and then there were some survey questions that were posted to that particular website. So those were the two methods, and now I'm going to dive into each of these approaches individually. Mike, next slide, please. So the first was the Trail Intercept survey, and as I kind of talk through the results, you can actually see the survey instrument that we used. And so this survey was conducted pre-COVID in August of 2019. And we visited the trail in several locations, Lake Chacolette. We visited the parking lot in Plummer, which I showed you earlier, made a couple trips up to Kellogg. And the goal was to stop people as they were using the trail and ask them these questions. And so we had a couple of people with clipboards with these surveys, and as we stopped people, we asked them some information. Now, mind you, you can imagine this is not easy depending on which mode a person was utilizing for that trail. So if you had some people that were just walking on the trail, this Intercept survey approach was relatively beneficial and easy to conduct. But then, of course, there were a number of people that were using the trail for bicycle riding activities. And you can imagine if there's someone who's traveling at a relatively high rate of speed, physically stopping them and asking them to answer a series of questions was a little bit more challenging. And so, we had a variety of responses, and certainly there were people who we tried to flag down who politely, in some cases impolitely, sort of waved us off, and we weren't able to get responses, of course, for everyone. But here for this survey, as I go through the specifics, you can see I provided a summary there in the right column. We ended up getting 99 responses as over the course of the visits to the different sites, and asked a series of questions like, how did you access the trail today? And over 70%, 71%, in fact, of our responders indicated that they had utilized an automobile, a vehicle of some sort, to drive to the trail and then access the trail. We had 10% of our responders who lived nearby the trail. And so they indicated that they either walk or ran or jogged to the trail itself. And then just under 10%, 8% of our responders indicated that they had biked from wherever they were living to the trail itself. We also asked questions to determine if the individuals that were using the trail, if they were locals or if they were actually, seeking out the trail as a destination. And 63% of our responders indicated that they had traveled from their home to visit the trail. But some, I think maybe surprisingly, 37% of our responders indicated that they had traveled from some other location. So this was a situation where they were perhaps vacationing, staying at an Airbnb or at a hotel, and then accessing the trail itself. And so, that was something we wanted to find out about. The trail of the Coeur d'Alenes, is unique in the sense that it's relatively isolated in some locations. There's, the length of the trail, over 70 miles, does prompt many of the people to be vacationers. We also asked questions how many times how many miles they had traveled to get to the trail itself, and just over half, 53%, reported traveling less than 10 miles to get to the trail, but 16% indicated that they had traveled over 100 miles to visit the trail. So again, this is capturing some of our vacationers. 75% used a human-powered vehicle. In this case, 22% were walking, jogging, or running, and 3% used an e-bike. And so e-bikes are becoming more and more popular. I was just reading an article this morning. Sounds like there may be some tax credits that may be coming for people that purchase an e-bike here in the next couple of years, depending on if that transportation bill, infrastructure bill passes. That's tucked into the legislation. And so we wanted to separate out traditional bikes with e-bikes. And so we did have a small percentage that used e-bikes. When we asked people why they were using the trail, not surprising, most people answered for recreational purposes, 96% in fact. And we also had just a couple people indicate, based on our Intercept survey, that they were using it for commuting or for regular daily activities. We asked folks how long they spent, time spent on the trail. 65% indicated that they were planning to spend over 2 hours. 23% indicated the time range to be between 1 and 2 hours. And we had 7% indicate that they were spending just about a half an hour or less on the trail itself. So a relatively widespread. We also asked folks how frequently they had visited the trail to Coeur d'Alene's. 39% indicated that they had used the trail just once in the last year. We had about 1 in 5 indicate that they had used the trail between 3 and 5 times, and 15% indicated that they had used the trail twice. And then just some basic demographics: 59% were male responders, 41% were female. We had about 50% of the responders between the ages of 36 and 65. I think not surprisingly, over 90% of our responders indicated that their ethnicity was white or Caucasian. And then somewhat interesting was when we asked that final question, what their household income was, about a third indicated that their household income was the highest range that we provided, 111,000 and over. So that trended, toward that higher household range. We had another 16% that indicated that they were in that second highest household income bracket. So that's just a synopsis of our trail intercept survey. I'll now talk a little bit about our trail impact survey. Mike, if you could advance to that next slide, please. So this was an online survey. As I mentioned, we wanted to assess the perceptions of now focused on the residents who lived along or adjacent to the trail. And, we thought about the ways that we would actually collect this data, and ultimately used a methodology that is available through the United States Postal Service. So a lot of times you'll see a mailer. It can be a furniture company or a mattress company, perhaps, with that postage marking that you see in the upper graphic. And in fact, we learned that we could also do this for a survey, an academic survey. And so we generated the postcard. The backside is in the upper graphic. The sort of the front side, if you will, is the lower graphic. Talked about the survey, and then you can see we came up with a tiny URL link for the survey, where people, once they received the postcard, if they wanted to participate, could then enter in that information, and then it took them to the online survey that we had developed. Tried to incentivize it a little bit, so we offered a couple of gift cards, $25 to either a Walmart store in their neighborhood, or if they were an online shopper, they could also select the Amazon gift card. And so identified a couple of mail carrier routes that were located along the trail, and we selected 3 neighborhoods for this particular online survey: one in Plummer, one in Wallace, and another in Kellogg. We ended up sending out an exact total of 1,634 of these postcards out. And if you've done survey work, you know that survey response rates can be frustratingly low. In this case, we received 4.4% of the surveys back, and that equated to 71 households who took the time to enter in the web address and then complete the survey. So not outside the sort of the common expectation of what a sort of a postcard survey response rate would be, and that's why we had chosen to send out so many in the first place. In terms of the responses here, again, I've summarized the responses in that far right column. We asked people, what sort of activities did you do using the trail, if you use the trail itself? And 85% of our survey responders indicated that they rode a bicycle. We had over 80% that indicated that they used the trail to walk. We had some people that 39%, in fact, indicated that they used the trail not only to walk, but also to take their four-legged pet with them. So 39% indicated using the trail for dog walking purposes. And then about a third indicated that they used the trail for jogging and running activities. We asked individuals, from a seasonality standpoint, how frequently did you use the trail? And here, not surprising, in the summertime, we had a third of our responders indicated that in the summer they frequently used the trail. Another third indicated that they occasionally used the trail. And you compare that to the responses in the wintertime, where nearly half of them indicated that they did not use the trail at all. So there definitely was a seasonal difference there. We asked individuals, did you actually start doing any of these physical activities as a result of the trail being present? And 40% of our responders indicated that they did. So here we have a net benefit for the community, in the sense that had the trail not been present, we might have had a few more couch potatoes in these communities. When asking how far they traveled, not surprisingly, most people lived nearby the trail. So 46% indicated traveling 5 miles or less. Another 31% indicated that their travel distance was between 6 and 15 miles. We also asked the responders here, because they lived adjacent to the trail, for some feedback on certain characteristics. Characteristics such as, what's your perception of the scenery along the trail? And nearly 9 out of every 10 responses indicated that the scenery was very good. 7 out of 10 indicated that they liked the ease of the access of the trail from home. And then we also had about 6 out of 10 indicating that they found that the presence of the trail tended to positively impact, or very positively impact, their home values. Only 1 in 10 indicated that there was some traffic that was associated with the trail, and I suspect that occurs certainly in the summertime more so than the winter. And then a lot of favorable feedback with regard to the trail promoting recreational activities as well as health and wellness. It was almost unanimous with regard to those topics. We also asked feedback from the community in terms of what the folks that maintain the trail might do. We received comments such as, be nice if the trail was plowed more frequently in the wintertime, if there were more restrooms available, more trash receptacles present, perhaps more benches and seating. And I think those, requests kind of have a double-edged sword, in that they do provide some additional convenience, more amenities, but there can be trade-offs. Obviously, if the trash receptacles aren't emptied as frequently as people may like, then that may contribute to some other sort of negative aspects associated with it. So kind of be careful what you ask for. And then lastly, with regard to the demographics of the online survey, here we had more females that responded, 57% female, 43% male. Tended to be a little bit of a bimodal split when it came to age. 28% were 45 to 64. And then we had about a third that were over 65. Still 9 out of 10 were, when it came to race, were white or Caucasian. And then I think of note, when it came to the household income question, we had over a third that indicated that their household was less than 50,000. And then we had another 30% that indicated that their household income was between 50,000 and 99,000. So online survey, household income trended on the lower end, whereas our Intercept survey, vacationers, perhaps people with a little bit more disposable income, that household income was higher. Mike, if you could go to that next slide, please. So, I think what was interesting about our survey outcomes was that with the Intercept survey, particularly at the locations that we visited, we were able to capture our visitor perspectives to a higher level. By comparison, our online survey provided insight mostly from residents who were able to form opinions, some of which had been long-standing opinions, depending on how long they'd lived in that area. And our recommendation, and we found this to be beneficial, was by examining both sets of responses, it really helped to provide a much more complete picture, a more complete impression of the overall user interaction that exists here with the trail of the Coeur d'Alenes. And so with that, Mike, I'll have you go to our last slide. We would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. You can see both of our emails are provided there at the top right of the screen. Mike Lowry at mlowry@uidaho.edu. My email at kchang@uidaho.edu. And I will pause here for just a moment and see if we have any audience questions. And let me also just take a moment here to, again, recognize and thank CSET for this opportunity to present today. If you have any more information or would like more information about CSET, you can also go to their website, which is cset.uaf.edu.
Chat would be the best place to post any questions from the audience, or raise your hand if you have that option.
All right. Well, if you do have questions, certainly, feel free to reach out to us. But we certainly appreciate your participating in our webinar today. And then, Vicki, I'll turn it back over to you if you have any closing remarks you'd like to make. Thank you.
I'd like to thank both Mike and Kevin for a very interesting presentation today, and to make the comment that this presentation has been recorded and will be posted on YouTube for people to view at their leisure at later date. And on that note, I will be stopping the recording now.